most feared girl in Mexico. I was going to say, what was that woman's name? The one in Mexico that, just kept cutting off and shoving them. And then not only that, but would and completely just
I don't think you can talk about this in the first minute of the video.
Oh shit, we're recording. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, Mr. Ballin has got another video for us. The most feared girl in Mexico. Well, it's not a new video. This is 2.5 years old. But honestly, anything by Mr. Ballin, I'm gonna watch. I mean, Mr. Ballin is always Mr. Ballin. This is younger Mr. Ballin too. This is his unkempt, his light stash and soul patch days. Whereas now he's got more of he doesn't got quite the beard that I got, but I guarantee he could probably grow a pretty awesome beard. And you know what would definitely be censored on a lot of these social media platforms? Some of the grotesque things that this woman probably did. Oh, so this is Mr. Ballin with the most feared girl in Mexico. I guess we should get into it. So, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go.
Oh, from what I've heard from my friends who grew up Mexican families, the most feared girl in Mexico is all of their mothers.
Well, of course, because they're all afraid that their mother's going to get mad at them and throw a chancla at their head.
Yeah, and they all got sniper aim with them too.
This story has a very graphic ending, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please put a single metal fork in the like button's microwave, set it for 99 minutes, hit start, and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any.
Well, I mean, you heard him. There you go.
Our weekly uploads. Before we get into today's story, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. Back in 2015, when I was still in the military and was not on YouTube yet, I fell into a very deep depression. I was mad all the time. I was isolating myself. I was basically self-destructing. And eventually, after my family encouraged me to do so, I did go out and get help. I sought out a therapist. And honestly, looking back, I think that decision saved my life. So when BetterHelp, which is a very highly reviewed online therapy platform, reached out to me and asked if we could partner, I immediately said yes, because I know therapy works. For the last couple of months, I've been using their platform, and it's great. It's easy to use, it's affordable, all their therapists are licensed and accredited, but in my opinion, the best and most unique aspect of BetterHelp is that it's all online. Back in 2015, I almost didn't seek out a therapist because I was so concerned about physically walking into the therapist's office and having someone who knows me see me walking in and judging me. But with BetterHelp, you can get the help you need from the comfort of your home and in total anonymity. Sign up is super easy. You just fill out a questionnaire, and then right away a therapist gets in touch with you and they set up a time to talk to you within 48 hours. And if you want to change your therapist at any time, it's free and very easy to do. So if you think talking to someone could benefit you like it benefited me, then go to betterhelp.com/Mr. Ballin. That's better, H-E-L-P. And if you sign up using the Mr. Ballin link in the description, you'll get 10% off your first month. Okay, let's get into today's story. The Sierra Madre Oriental is a major mountain range that starts on the southern border of Texas and Mexico and cuts 700 miles south through the northeastern section of Mexico. About halfway down this mountain range on the eastern face lies a series of caves, and situated below these caves at the foot of the mountains are several small villages that are very isolated, and they're populated primarily with illiterate poor farmers. One night back in May of 1963, a 14-year-old boy named Sebastian Guerrero Guerrero, who lived in one of these small isolated villages, decided to go for a walk up in the mountains, and he wanted to go explore the different caves. Now, this was something he did fairly regularly because there was a local rumor that there was actually hidden treasure in these different caves. Now, it's unclear if Sebastian...
I mean, I've heard stories about those mountains and like the various things that are in there. Is it? I was going to say that's actually one of the fears where like chupacabra comes from. Like the chupacabra living up in those mountains and actually are quite a threat to like the goat farmers and like everyone who lives in those areas. Need an eye drop? Are you good?
No, I'm just my forehead.
Okay.
Literally believed that, or if that was just kind of an excuse to go have a look around himself. But regardless, he headed out of his house and he began walking up the mountain towards these caves. The entrance to these caves were a couple hundred feet up the mountainside, and then each of the various entrances, which ranged in size from fairly small to enormous, were spread out a couple of miles in each direction. So Sebastian starts walking up the mountain towards the first entrance he can see. It's dark outside, he's got no flashlight, he's just walking up, and as he's walking, he notices off to his right, fairly far away from where he was, there was light coming out of one of the cave entrances. And he had never recalled seeing light coming out of any of these caves. Nobody ever went in these caves, especially not at night. And so his interest was piqued, and he decided he would kind of abandon his original plan to just kind of look around near his village, and he would actually walk all the way over to that lit up cave and see what was going on. So he turned right and began kind of walking uphill at an angle in the direction of this lit up cave. And so as he's walking, he's getting farther and farther away from the village where he lives, and he's starting to hear sounds coming out of this lit up cave entrance. It sounds like a person potentially, either they're laughing or they're screaming. He doesn't really know. He's thinking, you know, maybe someone's having a party inside one of these caves. He has no idea. But after he gets maybe 200 or 300 feet away from this entrance, he realizes it's definitely a person, and they're definitely screaming. And it does not sound like they're screaming out of joy. It sounds like they're screaming because they're scared or they're in pain.
Go the other way, call the cops.
Exactly. That's what I'm doing. I'll be like, that's a man screaming. I'm going now. Just like, do like the little.
Are you making that sound?
I'm like hitting my two fingers together, like really quickly. Just.
Okay. Mine won't do it though.
I think it's because of like my calluses that I have on my fingers from working just. And just hear that little scampering down the hillside.
Closer and closer and closer to this cave, his anxiety is starting to ramp up because he's really starting to be frightened by what he's hearing, and he's starting to realize there's more than one person inside of this cave. In addition to the person that is screaming out, there also sounds to be a large contingent of other people that are either
towards
singing.
Anything that sounds like screaming, like out in nature, that's the sound that mountain lions make.
Yes.
I don't know if they have mountain lions in Mexico, but I would assume that it is possible.
I would probably say they would. Hold on. Mountain lions in Mexico? Are there mountain lions in Mexico?
Apparently we have a skunk near our house.
Oh, yeah.
I smelled a hint of skunk.
No, that was the weed I smoked earlier. I'm just joking. I didn't smoke down here. Yes. Turns out in certain cases, like cougars and North American cougar and mountain lions can be south of the border.
Yep, cougars and bobcats are both screaming cats, and they can sound like people screaming. So
yeah,
it's not really something you want to go towards. You'd probably be better off calling authorities if you hear someone screaming.
Respect my authority.
In unison or chanting in unison, but some group of people are doing something in unison while some other person is screaming out. And so he's really starting to get nervous about this cave, but he just can't help feeling curious about what was going on. And so he just continued walking until he was maybe 10 feet away from the entrance to this cave, and he plopped down behind a rock. And so he's not really sure if it's a good idea to look. He doesn't want to be spotted by whoever is in there, but finally he kind of works up the courage, he takes a deep breath, and and he slips out from behind the rock, and he goes right to the edge of this big opening, maybe 10 foot across opening, and he peeks his head right around the edge of the opening, and he looks inside, and what he sees causes him to just freeze in terror. Then his survival instincts just kick in, and he turns and he starts running down the mountain away from this cave. He has no idea if he's been spotted or not, but he's sensing that someone could be chasing him, and so he is just running as if his life depended on it. And he would not run back to his village. Instead, he would run nearly 10 miles to the nearest police station. And when he gets there, he busts through the front doors, and he's totally hysterical. He's drenched in sweat, and the police officers are totally caught off guard, and so they're trying to tell him to calm down. And so Sebastian finally would kind of compose himself, but then he just was not able to describe what he had seen inside of this cave. Whatever he had seen, he knew it was bad, but the words were just escaping him. And so the way he described it to police was he basically thought he saw vampires. And as soon as he began describing vampires to the police, they're thinking to themselves, okay, I don't know what's going on with this kid, but this just cannot be serious. And so they consoled him and kind of calmed him down and said, look, kid, you know, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, if there's any news that comes out of something happening in the cave that's bad, you know, I'm sure we'll hear about it and we'll follow up. But for now, we're just going to bring you back to your village. And so at this, Sebastian was really frustrated, and he was kind of pleading with the police, like, no, you got to take me seriously. There's something bad happening in this cave. Someone could be hurt. Someone could be dying. I don't know, but you got to go to this cave. You got to go see what's going on. But the police at this point, they're just not really interested. And so they ultimately do just drive him back to his village. And
yeah. I mean, okay. You don't run 10 miles to lie to somebody. Now, me and my friends, like, we'd drive up somewhere, like, we would have driven up somewhere, and we'd have, like, man, be like, what should I tell him? Should I tell him this? Yeah, maybe you should tell him that. Okay, good. Okay, I'm gonna go in. No, 10 miles? That's something you really need to take into consideration. This kid ran 10 miles to the nearest police station to tell them this. I mean, yeah, this isn't a kid, like, embellishing anything. This is a kid who's seen something horrible, and his mind doesn't know what to make of it.
Poop out of him.
Yeah, literally.
And so he goes back into his home, the police go back to their station, and everyone just kind of goes to bed for the night. The next day, when Sebastian wakes up, he just can't shake what he saw inside of that cave. And so he would, once again, run back to the police station, and when he got there, he began pleading with the police, like, you gotta go see what's inside of this cave. I'm telling you, there's something awful in there. And this time, one of the police officers, his name was Luis Martinez, he would say, you know, okay, kid, bring me to this cave and I'll have a look around. And so Luis and Sebastian, who was very grateful, they left the police station, they hopped in a police car, and they took off. And then later on in the day, the other police officers, who were not really paying attention to this cave thing, they realized that Luis and the boy had not returned yet, and Luis had not checked in via his radio. And so at some point in the afternoon that day, the other officers began calling out to Luis. They began calling him on his radio and trying to figure out what's going on, but he wasn't responding. And so the police thought that was odd, but they thought, you know what, I'm sure he'll be back soon. There's got to be an explanation for this. But the rest of the day would go by without Luis reaching out to them, and he didn't return with the boy. And so by that evening, the other officers were genuinely concerned that, you know, something bad had happened to their colleague. And so they tried calling Luis a few more times on the radio. It didn't work.
Why they
and so
weren't
the officers,
concerned the minute he wasn't answering his radio. No sense of urgency for saving people at all, apparently, don't they?
Well, here's the thing. In laid-back areas, you don't really expect something horrible to be going on. For instance, in my hometown, there's about 3,500 people. If I found out that there was, like, just like this horrible thing going on and people were dying, most of the time the police officers would just think that I was bullshitting. Because that doesn't happen that often in areas like that. But that's the thing, is like, you have to at least entertain the idea, because what if it is? What if something worse? Or what? I don't know. That's the thing, is like, you never know. But anyway, sorry.
way over to Sebastian's village, and they found Sebastian's family believing that, maybe the boy was back and he could give some insight into where Luis went. But when they talked to Sebastian's family, they would say, hey, he's not back yet either. And so both Sebastian and Luis at this point have not talked to anyone all day, and they are missing. And so the police at this point, they realize this is an emergency. They need to figure out where these two went. And so they were kind of understaffed. And so they contacted the Mexican army, and they explained, we're missing one of our colleagues. We're missing a child from this village. And so the Mexican army would actually send out a military unit to assist them in going and finding these two people. And so the unit, they show up later that night, and the police and the Mexican army, they head out to where this cave was. And when they saw what was inside the cave, it would shock the world. To understand what was found inside of this cave, we need to go back 6 months to December of 1962. That month, two brothers, Santos and Cayetano Hernandez, who made their living basically traveling around Mexico, stealing from people and swindling people, they decided they were going to pull off their biggest heist yet. They were going to rip off an entire town. Their plan was to go into a small, fairly isolated village that was populated primarily with poor and illiterate people, and they would go in there and they would convince the villagers that they, the brothers, were actually prophets of an exiled Incan god. And if these villagers did everything they said, they would make them rich. And so the village the brothers identified as their target was a place called La Yerba Buena, which was located right at the foot of the Sierra Madre Oriental, right below where that cave was that Luis and Sebastian went to investigate. And La Yerba Buena was exactly what the brothers were looking for. It was home to only about 20 families that were all very poor and illiterate, and they were very suggestible. And so right before the new year, the Hernandez brothers strolled into La Yerba Buena, and they put on this very dramatic show explaining how they were the prophets of the Incan god. And these two brothers, they were very charismatic and they were excellent salesmen. And so they really sold the lie. And these villagers who were very vulnerable and cut off really from the rest of the world, they believed them. They thought this was their big break. They're going to be rich. We just have to do whatever they say. And so almost immediately, the villagers effectively became the Hernandez brothers' slaves. They would give them anything they wanted and do anything they wanted. But after a couple of months of this, some of the villagers started to be frustrated with the Hernandez brothers, the prophets, because it seemed like they were not really working towards making the villagers rich. Instead, it just seemed like they were horribly mistreating the villagers. And it just didn't feel like this was a relationship that was benefiting the villagers. And so when this sentiment began to kind of make its way around the 70-ish people who lived in La Yerba Buena, the brothers picked up on it, and they could have, at that point, just kind of abandoned their gig. At this point, they've robbed the town dry. There's nothing left for them to give to the brothers. But for whatever reason, the brothers decide instead to salvage their operation. And so the brothers, they leave the village and they go to a city that's relatively close by, and they recruit this young woman named Magdalena Solis. She was a prostitute, and they tell her, hey, we have this con we're doing in La Yerba Buena where we're pretending to be prophets of this Incan god, and they're starting not to believe our lie, and so we need you, if you're willing, to come with us and pretend to be an actual Incan goddess. And so when you show up, they'll know that we were serious, that we have a direct line to the Incan gods and goddesses, and they'll believe us again, and they'll fall back in line. And so Magdalena, she likes the idea of participating in this con, and so she agrees to do it in exchange for some money. And so she, along with the Hernandez brothers and Magdalena's brother, his name was Eliezer, and he functioned as her pimp, those four people, they went back to Yerba Buena, and when they got there, the Hernandez brothers snuck Magdalena past all the villagers up to that cave up in the mountains, and they put her in the back of the cave. They kind of hid her behind some rocks, and they dressed her up in an Incan goddess costume. And then once she was in there, the brothers went back down to the village, and they rounded all the villagers up and said, come on, let's go up to the cave. We have a special ceremony for you. And so the villagers made their way up to this cave, and once they were all inside, the Hernandez brothers used some basic magic tricks and created basically a smoke screen. Once they had this smoke screen kind of billowing in the back of the cave, they secretly signaled to Magdalena, who was behind the smoke screen, and she knew that was her cue, and she leapt through the smoke, and she presented herself to the villagers for the first time, and she declared herself to be a reincarnated Incan goddess. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to kill you. And so the message she was sending to the villagers was so intense, they completely believed that this was an Incan goddess, and therefore this was not a ruse. The brothers were not lying to them.
I was going to say, how much money in Mexico in 1962 does 70 people have? Like, that's my question. It's just like...
Probably not enough to be worth all this effort.
No. This would be like me going to a homeless shelter and, like, pulling this off.
Everybody into thinking you're Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Just be like, you know, you're a lot fatter than you are in the pictures. And I'll just be like, well, my child, if you follow me, you too shall eat good.
The feasts of heaven do not disappoint.
Exactly. Oh, God. That'd be horrible.
Blaspheme.
Blasphemer!
This was all very real. There's a real goddess in front of us. And so they immediately fell right back in line. The plan worked exactly as the brothers wanted it to. However, there was an element of their plan they could not possibly have accounted for. And that was what Magdalena did next. Even though Magdalena was fully aware that what she was getting herself into was an act, it was a con, it was not real. Despite that, as soon as she jumped through the smoke and was standing in front of the villagers for the first time and saw the looks on these people's faces as they stared up at her, and she saw their reverence for her, it had this profound impact on her. This is a woman who's never had control in her life. She's been a prostitute since a young age, and here she is, the most powerful person in the room, and it's not even close. And it got to her head. And so when she left the cave that night, she literally believed she was a reincarnated Incan goddess, and she was not a merciful one. Within the first few days of her stay at La Yerba Buena, Magdalena used threats of violence on the villagers to completely take over the village. She very easily supplanted the Hernandez brothers at the top of the power structure. Now, the Hernandez brothers probably were quite surprised to see this happen because they were expecting Magdalena to play more of a prop role to keep them in power, not the other way around. But ultimately, they kind of just went along with it because through Magdalena's control over the villagers, they were able to continue to exploit the villagers, and so they were getting what they wanted out of this relationship. Within a few weeks of being in La Yerba Buena, Magdalena was not only abusing every villager in every horrible way imaginable, she also was becoming completely delusional. She convinced herself that in order to survive, she needed to start drinking blood, and so she demanded all the villagers provide her with blood, and so in fear of retribution, the villagers began slaughtering all of their farm animals and their own pets so Magdalena could drink their blood. For weeks and weeks and weeks, the horrible abuse Magdalena would dole out on the villagers would continue, and these blood rituals would continue. And then finally, sometime in April, two of the villagers decided, you know what? I've had enough. I don't believe Magdalena is actually an Incan goddess. I don't believe the Hernandez brothers are actually prophets. I think this is all a scam. And so they decided the way they would handle this is they were just going to flee the village. Now, somehow their plans to run away got out, and the Hernandez brothers found out about it, and they, in turn, told Magdalena about it. And when she heard the news, she immediately told everyone in the village to make their way up to the cave for a special ceremony. So all the villagers, including the two people that were planning on running away, they made their way up to the cave, and once everyone was inside, Magdalena walked to the front of the group, and she pointed
when they were bringing everybody up to the cave.
Exactly. That should have been that. That
should have been their opportunity to go.
Yep.
The two dissenters, the two people that were planning on running, and she demanded that the rest of the villagers kill them. And on the spot, all of the other villagers jumped on top of the 2 dissenters and they lynched them. They beat them to death in the cave. And then after these 2 people have been killed, Magdalena orders their bodies be strung up on these 2 pikes she had set up in the back of the cave, because she knew what she was going to be doing up in this cave. And so after these 2 bodies were strung up on these pikes, Magdalena grabs a chalice and she walks over to these 2 bodies and she presses the chalice up against their bodies where they're bleeding from, and she fills it up and then she drinks from the chalice. And at this point, everything changed. Suddenly, Magdalena understood that it wasn't good enough to just be drinking animal blood. That was not enough to keep her, a goddess, alive. She now could only consume human blood. And so for the next several weeks, periodically, Magdalena would order everyone in the village to go back up to the cave for a blood ritual, which they all knew what this entailed. This no longer had anything to do with animals. This was...
So, okay, real photo of the inside of the cave. Like, that's the legit cave that they used.
Dang.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
I wonder how many, like, lives were taken.
Animals.
2
This was
so far.
human blood rituals. She would order them up and they would have no idea who was going to be the sacrifice. And so all these people, they get inside this dark cave, and then Magdalena shows up and she stands in front of them, and after kind of looking them over, she identifies her next sacrifice, and out of fear, the other villagers, who were the friends and family of the victim, would launch themselves on top of the chosen sacrifice and lynch them in the cave. And then afterwards, their body would be strung up on one of the pikes, and Magdalena would walk over with her chalice. She would fill it with blood, and she would drink it. And so this would go on and on for several weeks. And one of the most distressing aspects of these human sacrifices is that as she did more and more and more of them, Magdalena got it in her head that beating the sacrifice to death before consuming their blood was spoiling the blood in some way. And so what she began doing was she would have the other villagers beat the sacrifice into submission, and then she would have the sacrifice strung up to one of the pikes while they were still alive, and then she would carve their heart out while they were alive, and then she would drink their blood. So in May of 1963, when Sebastian...
all that pops into my head is Kalima. Kalima. Even though that's the Thuggee cult in like the greater India, and this is like in Mexico.
The 14-year-old boy, when he poked his head around and looked into that cave, he watched one of these sacrifices having their heart cut out, and he didn't know what to make of it, and so he ran to the police. And then the next day, he and the police officer, Luis Martinez, they would go back to the cave, and Magdalena and her cult would spot them, capture them, and drag them both into the cave, and both of them would be ritualistically sacrificed. They would have their hearts cut out, and Magdalena would drink their blood. When the police and army arrived in La Yerba Buena, it was a ghost town because all of the villagers had been ordered up to the cave, where they had barricaded themselves inside with weapons, because Magdalena probably knew there was going to be a big police response because one of their officers has gone missing out here. They're bound to be found out. And so when the police and the army reach the cave, there's this big shootout with all of the villagers, and during the shootout, the majority of the villagers are killed. Also, the Hernandez brothers, they're also killed in the shootout. And then after the shootout stops, the police and the army would go into this cave, and they would discover the pikes, the bloody pikes that are in the back of the cave, with bits of human remains all over the ground. And then they would leave the cave, and they would search the town, and they would find the remains of Luis and Sebastian outside a particular shack, and then inside the shack was Magdalena and her brother Eliezer. They were still alive. They were trying to hide from the authorities, and so they would be arrested. It's believed Magdalena sacrificed and drank the blood of at least 15 of the villagers over a 6-week period. However, the only remains to be positively identified were Luis Martinez and Sebastian Guerrero. Ultimately, Magdalena and her brother Eliezer were sentenced to 50 years in prison, and all of the surviving villagers who participated in these sacrifices or who participated in in the shootout with police and the army, they were given 30 years in prison. Amazingly, none of the villagers ever testified against Magdalena or her brother, despite the fact they were almost certainly offered reduced sentences in exchange for their testimony. Clearly, they were more terrified of the Incan goddess than they were terrified of the prospect of 30 years in prison. Although the exact date of when this happened is not known, Magdalena would eventually die behind bars. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please put a single metal fork in the like button's microwave, set it for 99 minutes, hit start, and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 1 or 2 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and sweatshirts and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested, go to shopmrballin.com. If you want to learn about upcoming deals and promotions for our shop, go to our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballin. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's just Mr. Ballin. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is also Mr. Ballin. We also have a second YouTube channel just called Mr. Ballin Shorts where we post random short videos and lost episodes. We also have a Facebook page just called Mr. Ballin where we post condensed versions of the longer episodes you see on YouTube. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Cool.
It's pretty crazy.
That's nuts. Like, I was gonna say,
Real life sacrifice cult story.
Like, this bitch is crazy. Like, literally, like this chick is nuts.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe it, dude.
I ain't even sure what to say about that.
Just, wow. What a crazy, crazy woman.
Thought of a like button idea for Mr. Ballin, though.
What's that?
It's like, please, every time you go see a new movie, right afterwards, text message the spoilers from the movie to the like button's inbox.
There you go. That's a good one.
And that's horrifying to hear about. I hope I never come across a sacrifice cult like that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I got another one. I got another one for the like button. It's just go into the like button's like Netflix account, change the password, and then log him out.
Just hack the like button's Netflix account.
Well, no, because it's technically not hacking.
Yeah, I know, but everybody calls it that. It's like, I got hacked.
It's not how that works. But yeah, but I wouldn't know what to do if I ran into a strange cult like that. I mean, I've heard of cults in this area. I've heard of like some people getting together and like ritualistically like meeting up and like praying to an eldritch god. And
not.
Huh?
I have not.
I've heard of it. Like it was just like a group of like 6 people in a desecrated place, like a not desecrated. What's the word? Desolate. Like a desolate place, all just standing around and like with like a effigy to like the eldritch god that they were praying to, and just like would like chant, be like come forth, reveal thyself, come forth, reveal thyself. It's like, you do realize that H.P. Lovecraft made all that shit up, right? I mean, I'm not gonna tell people what they can and cannot believe in. Hell, you can believe in the flying spaghetti monster. Yeah, Pastafarians. That's the fact that that's an actual religion is hilarious. And I know that Richard Dawkins is like kicking himself. It's like, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did I say that? Because now, actually, that's the hilarious thing about the Pastafarians. They have him as the prophet of the Great Flying Spaghetti Monster just to piss him off. That to me is hilarious. Anyway, so yeah, the most feared girl in Mexico. That woman was crazy. 100%. That woman was crazy. And well, I got nothing else to say except for glad they caught her, and I'm glad she's dead. And I guess that's going to do it for me. But, you got anything else you want to add? Alright, well, anyway, take care, everyone. Have a nice night. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.